Good Thursday morning of the 33rd week. I just got back from Mass. I just got done reading a kid's term paper. And so now I'm going to try to finish up the rest of these videos for the 33rd, what did I say it was, the 33rd week. Did a little text and a little trickier than usual. I didn't give you the Maccabees, the first reading. That's over my head, okay? I just been sticking with St. Luke's Gospel. It's just a reflective moment on my part. Whatever. But it's interesting. The next couple of days, tough readings, actually, in the Gospel. I'll read it to you now. It's 9:15. Luke, here's from Luke. He says, as Jesus drew near Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if this day you only knew what makes for peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. That's an interesting line. For the days are coming upon you when your enemies will raise a palisade against you. They'll encircle you and hem you in on all sides. They'll smash you to the ground and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another within you, because you didn't recognize the time of your visitation. I don't know the historical moment. But certainly the Jews of Jerusalem were crushed. They were crushed by the Greeks, but they were crushed by the Romans. And then maybe he's looking backwards and is saying that what he tells you will happen already happened. I don't know. It's our Lord speaking, but it's through Luke's understanding. And Luke is actually writing to the Gentiles as well. Of course, he's especially writing to Gentile Christians. And maybe he's warning them. You could think of Jerusalem now not as the center of Judaism, but you could think of it as Rome. The emergence of Rome as the center of Christianity as it's evolving a long way before it becomes that 400 years later, 300 years later at least. But what he says about Jerusalem, I think it could be said of Rome, but most of all, and I will push this line for whatever it's worth, the West. Because I think, when I read this text, I think of the Second World War, especially European theater, the devastation. And it came about by the evolution of ideologies that were inherently violent. They were the quintessential opposite of the gospel. Especially in the worst, I think, are Hitler and Stalin. Both were Catholics. And both rejected Christianity. And in both cases, especially Hitler, saw himself as a messianic figure. And he was able to mesmerize the people of Germany, who had a tremendous need to be refurbished. They had taken such a beating after the First World War. They were impoverished. They were very unjustly treated by the Treaty of Versailles and its aftermath. That he found he was able to speak to their desire to make Germany great again, to his famous expression. But instead, he was demonic. He offered him a false promise by making himself the new Messiah. And in a very real way, they abandoned, through him and in him, they abandoned their Christianity. And that's the truth. I watched a thing the other night. You may have watched it too. I don't know. It was, it had to do with Hitler. It was called what did they call him? The Nazi Messiah. I think that's the title, the Nazi Messiah. And the opening line was that Germany was a very religiously Christian country, but the circumstances, etc., made them open to a new messianic leader, and that leader brought hell on earth to them and to the world, to Europe. Something in the neighborhood of 80 million people were killed in the Second World War, both in Asia and Europe. Horrible. And it was by the most educated and the most sophisticated people on earth. Yeah, the Japanese, the Europeans, all of Europe, you see. I think this is what happens when you worship a false god and when you don't recognize the God among you, the holy, and instead you replace it radically with a secular philosophy, a secular wisdom. I think that's what happened. I think Europe has been de-Christianizing itself for 500 years, more. And in so doing it, while it retained its Christianity to a certain level, in another way, it had abandoned it. Not individual people, but as a culture. I don't know. But I have to say, I'm concerned about, I'm not trying to, I learned from Europe. I say, what happened in Germany can happen here in the United States. If it could happen to them, the most sophisticated people, arguably, in the world. And you have to just go to Germany and say, what a beautiful place, what a beautiful people. I love Germany. If I had to choose, if I was to say, you can live anywhere you want, but it has to be in Europe, where would you? Now, you'd think I'd say Italy, where I have my family, where I have a home that my father bought his family 100 years ago. It's my house. It's my brothers and I. It's ours. You see, my aunts live there, my cousins. It's still ours. You get it? Could go back, and they would welcome me. I mean, I'd pick Germany anytime. Anytime I'd pick Germany. I love Germany. I love the German people. I love the land. And that's why I said what I said just a few minutes. If it could happen in Germany, it can happen anywhere. I don't condemn the German people. I learn from them. Be careful the gods you worship. Make sure you recognize the true Christ among you. See, the condemnation here in the text was they failed to see Christ who was present. See? We run that same risk. Christ who has walked among us for 2,000 years in Western civilization, at least, if not global civilization. Yet, in such a horrifying way, we failed to see him. Europe failed to see him in the first half of the 20th century. And the catastrophe that followed was a witness to the false gods that were worshipped. I learned from them. If it could happen there, it can happen here. The human heart is no different here than it is there. And we as a people, I think of Americans, we have a deep root in Christianity. We are a Judeo-Christian culture. And it has fueled, I would call, the American genius. And in many ways because of the priority on human dignity and human rights. It's not just philosophical, it's religious in its deepest sense. I hope we never abandon it. If we do, I think we will pay the price for it as a culture and as a nation. You don't live by law alone. You don't live by law alone. You have to have a vision of humanity and a vision of human dignity and the social order as, in fact, a body of fellow citizens in the deepest sense as neighbors, not as just voters, but as neighbors. Christianity gives us that at its very core, and especially the absolute inviolability of human dignity and human rights. That's the American experience, but it's rooted in Judeo-Christianity, as well as the philosophies of John Locke and other great Anglo philosophers. And Kant, the German philosopher. See? We are heirs to that intellectual, moral, and spiritual tradition. I hope we never betray it, or we will pay a price, just as Europe paid the price. That's the truth. I'm optimistic. I'm not negative. I wouldn't want to teach college. But I do see in my students' faces the promise and the beauty of tomorrow. And I hope when I teach them to see deeper than the mere pragmatisms of life, but see the depth of who and what we are as a people. And our Judeo-Christians, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic foundations of human dignity rooted in profound belief in God.